The ink hadn't even dried on the divorce decree when the room's temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Everyone expected tears. They expected begging. Instead, she capped her pen with a deafening click, pushed the papers across the mahogany table, and checked her watch, a piece that looked like cheap plastic, but was actually a prototype worth more than the entire building. Patrick thought he was discarding a burden. He didn't realize he was handing over the keys to an empire. In exactly 30 seconds, the doors behind him would burst open, and the world he thought he owned would bow to the woman he'd just discarded. This is the story of how a silent signature triggered a $1 trillion earthquake. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Ashford Manor Library, blurring the manicured gardens outside into a smear of grey and green. Inside, the air was stifling, smelling of old leather-expensive cigar smoke and poorly concealed contempt. Patrick Ashford sat at the head of the table, his posture relaxed, almost bored. He adjusted the cuff of his bespoke Italian suit, glancing at the woman sitting opposite him. Evelyn, his wife of 3 years. She looked small in the oversized velvet armchair, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She wore a simple beige cardigan and jeans that had seen better days, an outfit that Patrick's mother Beatrice had sneered at the moment Evelyn walked in. "Let's get this over with, shall we?" Beatrice said from the corner of the room. She was sipping a martini, though it was barely noon. "I have a gala to prepare for, and I really don't want this unpleasantness lingering in the air." Arthur Penhaligon, the Ashford family lawyer, cleared his throat. He was a man who charged by the minute and looked the part with a hairline that receded in direct proportion to his moral compass. He slid the thick document across the polished mahogany surface. "The terms remain as discussed," Arthur said, his voice oily. "Evelyn, you will receive a one-time settlement of $50,000. In exchange, you waive all rights to the Ashford estate, the tech holdings, and any future earnings of Mr. Ashford. You also agree to a non-disclosure agreement regarding the private matters of the family." The private matters were a polite way of referring to Patrick's brazen affair with Victoria Vanderbilt, a socialite whose father owned half the steel mills in Pennsylvania. Victoria wasn't in the room, but her presence was felt. It was the reason for this meeting. Patrick needed to be free to marry up to merge the Ashford tech empire with old Vanderbilt steel. Evelyn was just the placeholder who had kept his bed warm while he climbed the ladder. Patrick leaned forward, a pitying smile playing on his lips. "It's a generous offer, Evie. Really. Consider it a severance package. You can go back to that little town in Ohio, open a bakery or whatever it is people like you do. You'll be comfortable." "Comfortable," Beatrice echoed with a dry laugh. "She'll be rich by her standards." Evelyn didn't look at Beatrice. She didn't look at the lawyer. Her gaze was fixed on Patrick. Her eyes, usually a warm hazel, were terrifyingly flat. There was no anger, no sadness, just a void. "Is the pen working?" Evelyn asked softly. Patrick blinked, taken aback by the mundane question. "What?" "The pen," she said, reaching out and picking up the heavy Mont Blanc fountain pen Arthur had placed on the document. "Does it work?" "Of course it works," Arthur snapped, offended. "It's a ceremonial pen." Evelyn uncapped it. She looked down at the divorce papers. The header read, "Ashford versus Ashford Dissolution of Marriage." It marked the end of 3 years of gaslighting. 3 years of Beatrice treating her like hired help. 3 years of Patrick hiding his phone coming home, smelling of Victoria's perfume Chanel. Number 5, heavy and cloying. She remembered the day they met. She had been working as an archivist at the city library. Patrick had charmed her, played the part of the misunderstood rich boy who wanted a simple life. It was all a lie. He wanted a docile wife to please his shareholders, someone who wouldn't ask questions about the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. "Sign it, Evelyn," Patrick said, his voice hardening. "Don't make a scene." "I never make scenes, Patrick," she replied. She lowered the tip of the pen to the paper. Scritch, scratch. The sound was amplified in the silent room. She signed her name with a flourish that seemed at odds with her timid demeanor. Evelyn Pierce. She dropped the Ashford immediately. She dated it. Then she pushed the papers back to Arthur. "Done," she whispered. Patrick let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. He snatched the papers up, scanning the signature as if expecting a trick. "Finally. Arthur, file this immediately. I want the decree issued by the morning. Consider it done, Mr. Ashford." Beatrice clapped her hands together once, a sharp, dismissive sound. "Good. Now, Evelyn, I assume you have your bags packed. The driver can take you to the bus station. We wouldn't want you lingering." Evelyn stood up. She smoothed down her cardigan. For the first time, she smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the kind of smile a wolf gives before it tears into a deer. "There's no need for the driver," Evelyn said. "My ride is here." Patrick frowned, glancing at the window. "Your ride? You don't have a car, and an Uber won't come this far out into the estate." "I didn't call an Uber," she said calmly. A low rumble began to vibrate through the floorboards. It wasn't the sound of thunder. It was the deep mechanical purr of engines, heavy engines. Beatrice walked to the window, her martini glass trembling slightly. "What on earth is that noise?" She peered through the rain-streaked glass and gasped, dropping her drink. The crystal shattered on the hardwood floor, but no one paid attention. "Patrick," Beatrice whispered, her voice trembling. "Come look at this." Patrick walked to the window, annoyed. "What is it, Mother, a delivery truck?" He looked out. The long, winding driveway of the Ashford estate was usually empty. Now it was a sea of black. A motorcade of 6 armored SUVs, jet black with tinted windows, was tearing up the gravel flanking a central vehicle, a Rolls-Royce Phantom, extended wheelbase, customized with diplomatic flags on the fender. Above them, the distinct thwop, thwop, thwop of a helicopter cut through the storm, its searchlight sweeping across the manor's lawn. "What the hell is going on?" Patrick shouted, backing away from the window. "Who are these people? Is this a raid?" Arthur the lawyer was sweating. This looks like a head of state's detail." The vehicle screeched to a halt at the front entrance. The doors of the SUVs flew open in unison. 24 men poured out. They weren't wearing police uniforms. They were dressed in bespoke tactical suits, earpieces coiled behind their ears, moving with the precision of the Secret Service. They didn't knock. The heavy oak front doors of the Ashford Manor were thrown open with a force that shook the walls. "Hey!" Patrick yelled, marching toward the library doors. "You can't just barge in here. I'll call the police." The library doors swung open. 4 men entered. They were huge, blocking the light from the hallway. In the center of them stood a man in a grey suit that cost more than Patrick's car. He was older, with silver hair and a face carved from granite. He ignored Patrick entirely. He ignored Beatrice. He walked straight past the lawyer, who was cowering against the bookshelf. The silver-haired man stopped in front of Evelyn. He bowed, not a nod. A full 90-degree bow from the waist. "Madam Director," the man said, his voice thick with a Swiss accent, We apologize for the delay. The weather over the Atlantic was uncooperative. Patrick stood frozen, his mouth agape. He looked at the man, then at his wife, his ex-wife in her cheap beige cardigan. Madam. Director. Patrick stammered. Who are you talking to her? The silver-haired man straightened up and turned to Patrick. His eyes were cold blue ice. I am Henri de Saint, Chief of Staff for the Aurora Sovereign Trust, he said. Then he gestured to Evelyn, and I am speaking to my employer, the sole heiress to the von Bismarck-Pierce legacy, and the majority shareholder of the bank that holds your mortgage, Mr. Ashford. The silence that followed Henri's declaration was absolute. It was a vacuum sucking the air out of the room. Patrick Ashford blinked, his brain misfiring. The bank, the von Bismarck. What? He laughed nervously, looking at Evelyn. Evie, what is this guy talking about? Did you hire actors? Is this some kind of sick joke because I dumped you? Evelyn didn't answer him. She simply reached into her pocket and pulled out a phone. It wasn't the cracked iPhone 8 she usually carried. It was a sleek, transparent device made of glass and titanium, a prototype secure line phone that wasn't available to the public. She tapped the screen once. Henri, she said, her voice changing. The softness was gone. The timidity was vaporized. In its place was a tone of absolute command, a voice that had been trained in boardrooms from Zurich to Singapore. Status. The acquisition is complete, madame, Henri replied crisply. As of 2 minutes ago, when your signature on the divorce papers was confirmed via our drone surveillance, the blind trust was dissolved. Your assets are fully unlocked. Good, Evelyn said. She finally looked at Patrick. It's not a joke, Patrick. And stop calling me Evie. Only my friends call me that. You can address me as Ms. Pierce. This is insane, Beatrice shrieked, stepping over the broken glass of her martini. Get out of my house, all of you. I don't care who you think you are. Evelyn walked over to the mahogany table where the divorce papers still lay. She picked up the pen again, the one Arthur had mocked. Your house? Evelyn asked, tilting her head. Henri, refresh my memory. Who holds the deed to the Ashford estate? Henri pulled a tablet from his jacket. Technically, the Ashford family holds the title. However, the estate was used as collateral for a high-risk loan taken out by Patrick Ashford in 2021 to fund his failed cryptocurrency venture. That loan was underwritten by Shadow Corp Ventures. Patrick went pale. How do you know about Shadow Corp? That was a private deal, totally anonymous. Shadow Corp Ventures, Evelyn said, examining her fingernails, is a subsidiary of the Aurora Sovereign Trust, my trust. She took a step closer to Patrick. He actually took a step back, intimidated by the sheer aura radiating off her. It was as if the beige cardigan had dissolved, revealing armor underneath. I bought your debt, Patrick, she said quietly. 2 years ago. When you started treating me like furniture, I started buying your liabilities. I own this house. I own the yacht you take Victoria on. I own the warehouse where your company stores its prototypes. You can't, Patrick sputtered. You were a librarian. I met you stacking books. I was hiding, she corrected him. I was taking a sabbatical from the family business. I wanted to see if I could find someone who loved me. For me, not for the $300 billion attached to my last name. I thought I found that in you. Her eyes narrowed. I was wrong. Beatrice slumped into a chair, clutching her pearls. 300 billion. Arthur the lawyer suddenly looked like he wanted to vomit. He realized he had just bullied one of the wealthiest women on the planet into a $50,000 settlement. He began to frantically shuffle the papers. Mrs. Ashford, Miss Pierce, perhaps we can revisit the terms. If there was a misunderstanding regarding your status, surely we can— The papers are signed Arthur. Evelyn cut him off. I am legally divorced. I have no claim to Patrick's money. Patrick let out a hysterical laugh. See, she's stupid. She has billions, but she signed away her rights to my company. Evelyn smiled again. Oh, Patrick, I don't want your company. It's hemorrhaging money. Why would I want an asset that's depreciating? She turned to Henri. Is the helicopter ready? Engines are running, madam. We have a flight plan to New York. The board of directors for Olympus Holdings is waiting for your arrival to announce the hostile takeover of Vanderbilt Steel. The room went dead silent again. Vanderbilt Steel, Patrick whispered. That's Victoria's father's company. Correct, Evelyn said. Victoria told you to divorce me so you could merge your tech with her steel right, a powerful alliance. Evelyn walked to the door, her security detail parting like the Red Sea. She stopped at the threshold and looked back over her shoulder. I bought a controlling stake in Vanderbilt Steel this morning, Patrick. 51%. Victoria's father is being ousted as CEO tomorrow. She paused for effect. I'm firing him, and I'm liquidating the company's assets to fund my new renewable energy initiative. Patrick fell to his knees. It wasn't a figure of speech. His legs gave out. You're destroying them. You're destroying Victoria's family. No, Evelyn said coldly. I'm just doing business. And as for you, Patrick, she gestured to Henri, you have 24 hours to vacate my property. If you're not gone, I'll have your car towed. And since I own the bank that finances your car, I'll have it repossessed too. She walked out into the rain. But the rain didn't touch her. An aide immediately snapped open a large black umbrella shielding her from the storm. Patrick scrambled to the window, watching in horror. He saw his quiet mouse of a wife step into the back of the Rolls-Royce. He saw the heavy doors seal shut. He saw the convoy peel away, gravel spraying everywhere, the red taillights fading into the gloom like the eyes of a beast returning to the dark. Inside the library, Beatrice began to sob. Arthur was frantically dialing his firm on his cell phone. Patrick stared at his reflection in the dark window. He looked the same as he had 10 minutes ago, handsome, rich, successful. But as the realization crashed over him, he saw the truth. He was a man who had held a diamond in his hand, mistook it for glass, and threw it into the ocean. And now the tidal wave was coming back to drown him. The Obsidian Gala was the most exclusive event on the New York social calendar. It was held at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, a night where the city's elite gathered to flaunt their wealth, whisper secrets, and destroy reputations over champagne. Victoria Vanderbilt stood at the top of the famous steps posing for the paparazzi. She wore a shimmering silver gown that clung to her figure, diamonds dripping from her ears and neck. She felt invincible. Earlier that afternoon, Patrick had texted her the good news: the divorce was signed. The mouse was gone. The path to the Ashford-Vanderbilt merger was clear, but when Patrick's limousine pulled up, he didn't look like a conqueror. He stumbled out of the car, his face pale sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool evening air. He bypassed the photographers, ignoring their shouted questions, and rushed up the stairs to meet her. "Darling," Victoria hissed through a frozen smile, grabbing his arm. "What is wrong with you? The cameras are watching." "You look like you've seen a ghost." Patrick gripped her wrist, his fingers trembling. "We need to leave. Now." Victoria pulled back, laughing incredulously. "Leave? Are you insane?" "My father is inside. We're announcing the engagement tonight. This is our moment, Patrick." "You don't understand." Patrick whispered, his voice cracking. "Evelyn, she's not who we thought she was." Victoria rolled her eyes. "Oh, please. Did she cry? Did she beg for more money? I told you my father's lawyers can crush her if she tries to." "She bought your father's debt," Patrick blurted out. Victoria froze. "What?" Before Patrick could explain, a hush fell over the chaotic crowd of reporters at the bottom of the steps. It was a strange, sudden silence that rippled outward like a wave. The flashbulbs stopped popping. The shouting ceased. A low hum of murmurs began. Heads turned toward the street. A convoy was approaching. But this wasn't the usual line of black limousines. It was a phalanx of police motorcycle sirens, flashing silently, escorting a single vehicle. It was a Hyperion, Vega car so rare and expensive that only 3 existed in the world. It was sleek, matte midnight blue and looked more like a spaceship than a car. "Who is that?" a reporter shouted. "Is it the Prince of Monaco?" "No," another whispered. "Look at the crest on the flag." The car stopped at the foot of the red carpet. The driver, a man in a military-style uniform, stepped out and opened the rear door. First came the shoe. A stiletto heel, sharp as a dagger with a sole made of distinctive red crystal. Then the dress. It was a blood-red ball gown, structured and avant-garde, made of a fabric that seemed to ripple like liquid fire. It commanded attention. It demanded submission. The woman stepped out. Her hair, previously kept in a messy bun, was now cascading in sleek, dark waves down her back. Her makeup was sharp, accentuating eyes that scanned the crowd with imperious boredom. Around her neck sat the Star of the East, a sapphire necklace that had been missing from public record for 50 years. The crowd gasped in unison. "Is that?" "It can't be." Victoria squinted, looking down from the top of the stairs. She felt a cold pit open in her stomach. She recognized the face, but she didn't recognize the person. "Evelyn," Victoria whispered. The flashbulbs erupted. It was blinding, a wall of white light. The reporters were screaming now, tripping over each other. "Miss Pierce. Miss Pierce. Over here. Is it true you've returned to the States permanently? Miss Pierce, can you comment on the acquisition of Vanderbilt Steel?" Evelyn didn't stop for them. She glided up the stairs, flanked by Henri and 2 security guards. She moved with a grace that Patrick had never seen. Or perhaps he had just never looked closely enough to notice. She reached the top of the stairs where Patrick and Victoria stood blocking the entrance. Evelyn stopped. She looked at Victoria. Victoria, usually the queen bee, felt suddenly small. Her silver dress looked cheap compared to the living art Evelyn was wearing. But Victoria had pride, and she had malice. "Well," Victoria sneered, though her voice shook. "Look at you, spending your divorce settlement all in one place. You know you can put a dress on a pig Evelyn, but it's still a—" "Excuse me," Evelyn said. She didn't shout. She didn't sound angry. She sounded like she was speaking to a waiter who had brought the wrong order. "You're blocking the entrance." "Don't speak to me like that," Victoria snapped. "Do you know who I am?" Evelyn finally made eye contact. Her gaze was terrifyingly empty. "I know who you were," Evelyn said. You were the heiress to the Vanderbilt fortune, but as of 9 o'clock a.m. tomorrow, that fortune belongs to the Aurora Trust." Victoria laughed nervously. "You're delusional. Patrick, tell her she's delusional." Patrick couldn't speak. He was staring at the sapphire around Evelyn's neck. He was an expert in gems. It was a hobby of his. He knew that stone. It was worth more than his entire company. "It's real," Patrick whispered. "The necklace. It's real." Evelyn turned her gaze to Patrick. "Hello, Patrick. You're wearing the tie I bought you for our 2nd anniversary. It clashes with your fear." Suddenly, the museum director, a frantic little man named Mr. Henderson, came running out of the doors. He brushed past Victoria and Patrick as if they didn't exist. "Miss Pierce," Henderson gasped, bowing low. "We had no idea you were attending. We would have cleared the carpet. Please come in. Your private table is ready. The board is eager to thank you for your donation of the new West Wing." Victoria's jaw dropped. "West Wing? That's a $100 million project." Evelyn nodded to Henderson. "Thank you. I won't be staying long. I just came to inspect some recent acquisitions." She stepped forward, forcing Victoria and Patrick to part ways or be trampled by her entourage. As she passed Patrick, she paused, leaning in close to his ear. The scent of her perfume, a custom blend of jasmine and rare oud, filled his senses. It was intoxicating. "Enjoy the party, Patrick," she whispered. "It's the last one you'll ever be invited to." She walked into the museum. The heavy doors closed behind her, leaving Patrick and Victoria standing in the cold, the flashes of the cameras capturing their utter humiliation. The next morning, the sun rose over a New York City that felt different. The headlines were screaming. The return of the Pierce dynasty. Silent wife was secret trillionaire. Ashford and Vanderbilt stocks plummet in pre-market trading. Conrad Vanderbilt sat in his corner office on the 40th floor of the Vanderbilt Steel Tower. He was a large man, accustomed to bullying his way through life. But today, he looked shrunken. His phone had been ringing non-stop since 4 a.m. Creditors, partners, politicians, all of them distancing themselves. The double doors to his office flew open. Victoria burst in, still wearing her gala dress, her makeup smeared. She looked manic. "Daddy!" she screamed. "You have to do something! She's humiliated us, Sue! Freeze her assets!" Conrad looked up at his daughter with bloodshot eyes. "Shut up, Victoria!" Victoria froze. "Excuse me. I said shut up!" Conrad roared, slamming his fist on the desk. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You and that idiot boyfriend of yours. This isn't my fault. She lied. She pretended to be poor." "She didn't pretend anything," Conrad yelled. "She is Evelyn Pierce, granddaughter of Alexander Pierce, the man who built the infrastructure of half the Western world. They are old money, in a way we can't even comprehend. They value privacy above all else, and you poked the sleeping dragon." The intercom on his desk buzzed. "Mr. Vanderbilt, they're here." "Who?" Conrad asked, though he knew. "The new management." The doors opened again. This time it wasn't Victoria. 6 lawyers in charcoal suits entered, carrying briefcases. They lined up against the wall. Then Henri de Saint walked in, followed by Evelyn. She was wearing a sharp white power suit today, her hair pulled back in a severe ponytail. She looked clinical, efficient, deadly. "Get out of my office," Conrad blustered, trying to summon his old bravado. "Security, get them out. Your security has been relieved of duty," Evelyn said calmly, taking a seat on the leather sofa opposite his desk. She crossed her legs. They work for me now. We offered them a 20% raise and full dental. They were quite happy to escort you out of the building. You can't just take my company, Conrad spat. I have a board. I have shareholders. I am the board, Evelyn corrected, and I own 60% of the shares as of this morning. I triggered the buyout clause in your loan agreements. You were over-leveraged, Conrad. You bet on steel futures that didn't pay out. I picked up your debt for pennies on the dollar. She gestured to Henri, who placed a single sheet of paper on Conrad's desk. This is your resignation, Evelyn said. Sign it and you keep your pension and your house in the Hamptons. Refuse, and I authorize a forensic audit of this company's finances going back 10 years. Conrad went white. I know about the bribes to the EPA, Conrad, Evelyn said softly. I know about the off-the-books labor in the overseas plants. Sign the paper and you retire quietly. Fight me and you go to federal prison. Victoria rushed forward. You bitch! You can't do this to my father! She raised her hand to slap Evelyn. Before her hand could make contact, Henri moved with a speed that blurred the eye. He caught Victoria's wrist in mid-air, twisting it slightly until she gasped in pain and fell to her knees. I would advise against that, Miss Vanderbilt, Henri said. Assaulting a diplomat is a felony. Diplomat, Victoria wheezed. Miss Pierce is an ambassador-at-large for the United Nations Economic Council. Henri explained calmly, releasing her arm. She has diplomatic immunity. You, however, do not. Conrad stared at his daughter, then at the paper. His hand shook as he picked up a pen. He signed it. Wise choice, Evelyn said, standing up. Henri, have the building cleared. I want a full assessment of the assets by noon. We're pivoting the company to green steel and wind turbine manufacturing. The old mills are being shut down. But, Conrad whispered, that's my legacy. Your legacy was greed, Evelyn said. I'm scrubbing it clean. She turned to leave, but stopped at the door, looking down at Victoria, who was sobbing on the carpet. Oh, and Victoria, Evelyn said. I believe Patrick is looking for you. He's currently in the lobby of Ashford Tech, or what used to be Ashford Tech. Across town, the scene was chaotic. Patrick Ashford was swiping his keycard at the turnstile of his own corporate headquarters. Beep. Access denied. Come on, he muttered, swiping it again. Beep. Access denied. Hey, Jerry. Patrick yelled at the security guard at the desk. The machine is broken. Let me in. Jerry, a man Patrick had ignored for 5 years, didn't look up from his monitor. Badge doesn't work, Mr. Ashford. You're not in the system. What do you mean I'm not in the system? I built this system. I'm the CEO. Former CEO, a voice said from behind him. Patrick spun around. A woman he didn't recognize was standing there, holding a clipboard. I'm Sarah, the interim liquidation manager, appointed by the Aurora Trust, she said. The board voted this morning. You've been ousted for gross negligence and misappropriation of funds. Misappropriation, Patrick screamed. That's a lie. Is it? Sarah asked. The company leased a yacht, a penthouse in Miami, and a private jet. All used for personal reasons. All charged to the company accounts. The new majority shareholder has flagged these as embezzlement. Patrick felt the room spin. Evelyn, she's doing this. Ms. Pierce has instructed us to offer you a deal, Sarah said. Patrick's eyes lit up with a flicker of hope. A deal. She wants to talk. No, Sarah said. She wants her property back. The trust is seizing your personal assets to cover the embezzled funds. Your apartment, your car, your stocks. Everything. She can't take everything, Patrick cried. I'll be homeless. Sarah checked her clipboard. Miss Pierce anticipated this concern. She has generously offered to let you keep the contents of your personal safe and your clothing. Furthermore, she has arranged for a rental property in your name, paid for 2 months. Where? Patrick asked, desperate. The Upper East Side, Brooklyn. Sarah handed him a set of keys. It's a studio apartment in Ohio, she said, above a bakery. She said you mentioned it once. Something about a simple life. Patrick stared at the keys. The humiliation was total. She wasn't just ruining him. She was mocking him with the very lies he had told her. I need to see her, Patrick growled, clenching the keys. Where is she? She is currently en route to the airfield, Sarah said. She has business in Paris, but she left a message. What? She said, the pen worked. Patrick dropped the keys. He turned and ran out of the building, pushing past the confused employees, carrying boxes of his belongings. He had to stop her. He had to explain. He had to convince her that he still loved her, or at least that he could love her money. He flagged down a taxi. JFK Airport, private hangars, go. I'll give you $100. The taxi sped off, weaving through traffic. Patrick sat in the back, dialing Evelyn's number over and over again. The number you have reached is no longer in service. She had disconnected him. Drive faster, Patrick screamed. He wasn't going to let $1 trillion fly away without a fight. He was Patrick Ashford. He could charm anyone. He just needed 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes to remind her of who they used to be. But he was forgetting one thing. The Evelyn he knew didn't exist anymore. She had died the moment she signed those papers. The woman waiting on the tarmac was someone else entirely. Someone who didn't believe in second chances. The taxi screeched to a halt at the perimeter gate of the JFK private airfield. The meter read $120, but Patrick Ashford threw a crumpled wad of bills at the driver, his last cash on hand, and scrambled out before the car had fully stopped. The wind was howling across the tarmac, smelling of jet fuel and burnt rubber. Ahead past the chain-link fence, a behemoth sat waiting. It wasn't a standard business jet. It was an Airbus A320neo customized into a flying palace, painted a deep matte charcoal with the golden crest of the Aurora Sovereign Trust on the tail. The engines were already spooling up a high-pitched whine that vibrated in Patrick's chest. "Wait!" Patrick screamed, grabbing the chain-link fence. "Let me in." "That's my wife." 2 guards in tactical gear stepped out of the guard booth. They didn't look like mall cops. They looked like special forces. They had assault rifles slung across their chests. "Back away from the gate, sir," one of them barked. "You don't understand," Patrick yelled, shaking the fence. "I need to talk to Evelyn Pierce. Tell her Patrick is here. She'll want to see me." The guard pressed a finger to his earpiece, listening to a voice Patrick couldn't hear. His expression didn't change. "Open the pedestrian gate," the guard said to his partner. Patrick felt a surge of triumph. She still cares, he thought. She's angry, sure, but she can't just turn off 3 years of marriage. He smoothed his wind-blown hair, fixed his tie, and walked through the gate as it buzzed open. A black SUV waited to drive him the 300 yards to the jet. Patrick climbed in his heart, pounding. He rehearsed his lines. He would be humble. He would blame the stress of the company. He would blame Victoria, say she seduced him. Say he was weak, but that he only ever loved Evelyn. The SUV stopped at the bottom of the air stairs. The wind was fiercer here, whipping around the massive landing gear. Evelyn was standing at the top of the stairs. She wasn't boarding yet. She was waiting. She wore a trench coat made of black cashmere, belted tightly at the waist, and dark sunglasses despite the overcast sky. She looked like a monolith. Patrick scrambled up the stairs, breathless. When he reached the platform, he stopped a few feet away from her. Henri de Saint stood behind her, silent as a shadow. "Evelyn," Patrick gasped. "Thank God. I thought you left." "I was about to," Evelyn said. Her voice was barely audible over the whine of the turbines, yet it cut through the noise perfectly. "But Henri told me you were making a scene. I dislike scenes, Patrick. You know that." "I had to see you," Patrick said, stepping closer. He reached for her hand, but she didn't move. She didn't recoil. She simply stood so still that he froze before touching her. "Evelyn, please. This has all gone too far. The company, the House Victoria, it was all a mistake. I was scared. I was scared of losing everything, so I made bad choices. But us, we were real. I know you felt it." Evelyn slowly took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were dry. "You were scared of losing everything," she repeated flatly. "So you cheated on me for 6 months with a woman who mocked me to my face. It was business," Patrick pleaded. "Victoria was the key to the merger. I did it for the Ashford legacy." "Legacy," Evelyn murmured. She looked out over the grey horizon. "Do you remember last October, Patrick?" Patrick blinked, confused by the pivot. "October 1st. I was in Tokyo, closing the microchip deal." "You told me you were in Tokyo," Evelyn corrected. "You were actually in Aspen, with Victoria. You posted a photo on a private Instagram account. You thought I wouldn't see it because I didn't have social media." Patrick's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Do you know where I was that weekend?" Evelyn asked. She turned to look him dead in the eye. I assumed you were at the manor. Reading." "I was in the hospital, Patrick." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. "I had an ectopic pregnancy," she said, her voice devoid of emotion, which made it all the more terrifying. "I called you 7 times. I left voicemails. I texted. I needed my husband because I was losing our child, and the doctors weren't sure if I was going to make it." Patrick felt the blood drain from his face. "Oh my God. Evie, I didn't—" "My phone was off." "Your phone wasn't off," she said. "You sent me a text at 10 p.m. that night. It said, 'Stop calling, I'm in a meeting. Don't be clingy.'" Patrick reeled back as if physically struck. He remembered the text. He remembered Victoria giggling as he typed it sitting by the fire in the chalet. "I lost the baby, Patrick," Evelyn said. "And while I was lying in that recovery room, alone staring at the ceiling, I realized something. I didn't have a husband. I had a parasite. Evelyn, I didn't know." Patrick fell to his knees on the metal stairs. Tears streamed down his face, mixing with the grit from the tarmac. "I swear if I had known. Please give me a chance to make it right. We can try again." Evelyn looked down at him with an expression of mild curiosity, like a scientist examining a bug. "Try again?" she asked. "With who you?" She shook her head. "I didn't sign the divorce papers yesterday because of Victoria," Evelyn revealed. "I signed them 6 months ago, the day I left the hospital. I just waited. I waited for you to sell the last of your morality. I waited for you to leverage the house. I waited until you were so extended that one flick of my finger would topple your entire life." She leaned down, her face inches from his. "This isn't a breakup, Patrick. This is an extermination." She straightened up and nodded to Henry. "Remove him." "No, Evelyn." Patrick lunged for her, grabbing the hem of her coat. Henri moved instantly. He didn't strike Patrick. He simply applied a pressure hold to his shoulder that sent a shock wave of pain down Patrick's tall arm. Patrick screamed and released the coat. 2 security guards appeared from the cabin, grabbing Patrick by the arms and dragging him down the stairs. "You can't do this," Patrick howled, kicking his legs. "I'm Patrick Ashford. I made you." Evelyn watched him go. She didn't look sad. She looked liberated. She turned and entered the cabin of the jet. The heavy door hissed shut, sealing her in a world of silence and luxury. As Patrick was thrown back into the black SUV, he looked up. The massive plane began to taxi. The engines roared, blasting hot air across the tarmac. He watched as the jet lifted off, banking sharply into the clouds, taking his future, his fortune, and the only woman who had ever actually loved him, away forever. 1 year later, the alarm clock buzzed at 3:30 a.m. It was a harsh, metallic sound that grated against the thin walls of the studio apartment. Patrick Ashford groaned, rolling off the lumpy mattress. The room was freezing. The heater in the building had been broken for a week, and the landlord, a man named Mr. Henderson, who seemed to take perverse pleasure in Patrick's misery, had promised to fix it soon. Patrick shivered as he pulled on his white uniform. It was stained with yesterday's flour. He walked to the tiny bathroom, avoiding the loose floorboard that creaked. He splashed cold water on his face and looked in the mirror. The face staring back was older. The sharp jawline was softer now, hidden under a scruffy beard he couldn't afford to groom properly. The eyes, once arrogant and bright, were dull and ringed with exhaustion. He wasn't Patrick Ashford, tech mogul, anymore. He was just Patrick, the assistant baker at Sally's Morning Loaf in generic rural Ohio. He grabbed his keys, the only thing he owned, and walked out into the snow. The walk to the bakery was 2 miles. He didn't have a car. The Hyundai he had bought with his first paycheck had been repossessed when he missed payments to cover his legal fees. The legal fees were endless. He was being sued by shareholders. He was being sued by Victoria's father. He was even being sued by the caterers from the gala he never paid. He arrived at the bakery, the heat from the ovens hitting him like a wall. "You're late, Ashford," Sally grunted. She was a woman in her 60s with forearms like tree trunks and 0 sympathy for fallen billionaires. "Docking you 15 minutes. It's snowing, Sally," Patrick muttered, grabbing an apron. "Snows every winter. Get the sourdough started." Patrick began the rhythmic, back-breaking work of kneading dough. Push, fold, turn. Push, fold, turn. It was monotonous. It gave him too much time to think. Around 6:00 a.m., the first customers started trickling in. Locals. People who talked about the weather and high school football. Patrick kept his head down, praying no one would recognize him. "Hey, turn up the TV, Sal," a customer shouted from the counter. "The morning news is on. They're showing the Global Summit." Patrick froze. He knew what was coming. He tried to focus on the dough, but his eyes betrayed him. He looked up at the small television mounted in the corner. The screen showed a glittering ballroom in Geneva. World leaders were seated in rows, but the camera was focused on the podium. There she was, Evelyn Pierce. She looked radiant. She wore a tailored suit of royal blue, her hair styled in a sleek bob. She commanded the room. The caption on the screen read, "Evelyn Pierce, CEO of Aurora Trust, announces $500 billion Clean Ocean Initiative." "That woman is a saint," Sally said, leaning on the counter, wiping her hands on a rag. "Look at her. Richest woman in the world, and she's cleaning up the oceans. Single too, I heard." "Nah," the customer argued, biting into a donut. "I heard she's dating that British Duke. the one who races Formula One cars. Dominic Caldwell, Sally sighed dreamily. Yeah, I saw the pictures. Handsome couple. Power couple. Patrick felt bile rise in his throat. Dominic Caldwell. He knew the name. Caldwell was a rival from his old life, a man Patrick had once mocked for being too charitable. Now Dominic was standing beside Evelyn on the screen, clapping as she finished her speech. He placed a hand on the small of her back, a possessive, intimate gesture. Evelyn smiled at him, a genuine, warm smile. A smile Patrick hadn't seen in years. Patrick looked down at his flour-covered hands. Push, fold, turn. The door to the bakery chimed. A man walked in. He was out of place. He wore a camel hair coat and expensive leather gloves. He looked around the dusty bakery with a sneer, then spotted Patrick. Patrick stopped kneading. He recognized the man. It was Arthur Penhaligon, his family's old lawyer, the one who had botched the divorce. Arthur. Patrick wiped his hands, stepping forward. What are you doing here? Did you find a loophole? Is there money left? Arthur looked at Patrick with a mixture of pity and disgust. Hello, Patrick. You look rustic. Cut the crap, Arthur. Why are you in Ohio? Arthur pulled a manila envelope from his coat. I'm not your lawyer anymore, Patrick. I was disbarred thanks to the audit Miss Pierce initiated. I work as a courier now for private settlements. He tossed the envelope onto the flowery table. What is this? Patrick asked. Miss Pierce is tying up loose ends, Arthur explained. She's getting remarried next month, to Lord Caldwell. The room spun. Remarried, as a gesture of closure. She authorized me to bring you this. Patrick ripped the envelope open. Inside was a single photograph and a check. The photograph was of a small gravestone in a private cemetery. The inscription read, Baby Ashford. Too good for this world. She wanted you to know where it is, Arthur said quietly, in case you ever scrape enough money together for a bus ticket to visit. Patrick stared at the photo, his vision blurring. And the check? Patrick asked, his voice shaking. He turned it over. It was a check for $50,000, the exact amount he had offered her in the divorce settlement. She calls it a severance package, Arthur said, buttoning his coat. She said you can use it to open a bakery, or whatever it is people like you do. Arthur turned and walked out. Patrick stood alone in the heat of the kitchen. He held the check in one hand and the photo in the other. $50,000. It was a fortune to him now. It could fix his heater. It could buy a car. It could start a new life. But as he looked at the photo of the grave, the consequence of his selfishness carved in stone, he realized the money was poison. It was her final message. She was returning his insult, magnified by $1 trillion of spite. He looked at the TV screen again. Evelyn and Dominic were getting into a limousine, flashbulbs popping. She looked untouchable. Patrick laughed. It was a dry, broken sound. He walked over to the industrial oven, opened the heavy iron door, and stared into the roaring flames. He looked at the check. $50,000, he whispered. He threw the check into the fire. He watched it curl and blacken, the paper turning to ash in seconds. He kept the photo. He slid it carefully into the pocket of his apron, right next to his heart. Ashford, Sally yelled from the front. Bagels are burning, wake up. I'm coming, Sally, Patrick said. He closed the oven door, picked up a tray of raw dough, and went back to work. 3 years later. The bell above the door of Glitz Cosmetics in a strip mall in New Jersey chimed. "Welcome to Glitz. How can I help you sparkle today?" Victoria Vanderbilt recited the line in a monotone drone. She was wearing a pink smock that smelled of cheap hairspray. Her nails, once manicured to perfection, were chipped and short. "I need a refund on this bronzer. It made me look orange," a customer snapped, slamming a compact on the glass counter. "Do you have the receipt?" Victoria asked, staring past the woman. "No, just give me my money back." "I can't without a receipt. Store policy." "Do you know who I am?" the customer demanded. "I know the manager." Victoria let out a dry, humorless laugh. It was a sound that scraped against her throat. "Do you know who I am?" she whispered. The customer frowned. You're the checkout girl." Victoria stared at her reflection in the glass counter. The checkout girl. That's who she was now. The Vanderbilt fortune had been liquidated piece by piece to pay off the massive fines and lawsuits Evelyn's lawyers had unearthed. Her father Conrad had died of a heart attack 6 months after losing the company. The stress, the shame, and the looming prison sentence had been too much. Victoria had been left with nothing. No friends. They had all been fair-weather sycophants who vanished when the credit cards were declined. No Patrick, he was rotting in Ohio, baking bread for minimum wage. And no dignity. She processed the refund manually, just to make the woman leave. As the customer stomped out, Victoria looked at the magazine rack near the register. Vogue. The September issue. The cover was a black-and-white portrait, stark and stunning. It showed a woman standing on the balcony of a Venetian palazzo looking out at the water. She wasn't smiling. She looked serene. Powerful. The headline read, "The Quiet Queen. How Evelyn Pierce Redefined Power." Victoria reached out her trembling fingers, brushing the glossy paper. She remembered the gala. She remembered the red dress. She remembered the moment she realized she was nothing more than an insect buzzing around a lion. She didn't buy the magazine. She couldn't afford the $8.99. She just turned it over so she wouldn't have to see Evelyn's face, and went back to organizing the discount eyeliner bin. Thousands of miles away, the air smelled of lemon blossoms and salt water. Lake Como, Italy. The Villa d'Este had been closed to the public for the weekend. The gardens were filled with white roses. A string quartet played softly near the water's edge. Evelyn stood in her dressing room, looking at herself in the antique mirror. Her wedding dress was a masterpiece of lace and silk, simple yet regal. "You look breathtaking, madame," Henri said from the doorway. He was dressed in a tuxedo, holding a glass of vintage champagne. Evelyn turned to him. "Thank you, Henri, for everything." "It has been my honor," Henri bowed. "The helicopter is waiting to take you and Lord Caldwell to the reception. The guests are seated." "I'll be down in a moment," Evelyn said. Henri nodded and left the room, closing the door softly. Evelyn walked to the window. The sun was setting over the lake, painting the water in shades of gold and violet. She thought about the journey that had brought her here. The years of hiding in the library, trying to be small so she could be loved. The pain of the betrayal. The cold, hard steel of the pen in her hand the day she signed the papers. She opened the drawer of the vanity table. Inside, resting on a velvet cushion, was the Mont Blanc pen. The ink had long since dried, but she kept it. It was a reminder. She had once thought that love meant silence. She thought it meant enduring, compromising, and diminishing herself to fit into someone else's world. Patrick had taught her the most painful lesson of her life. Silence is not a virtue if it costs you your soul. But silence could also be a weapon. She hadn't screamed when she found out about Victoria. She hadn't thrown vases or made threats. She had simply signed her name. She picked up the pen one last time, feeling its weight. There was a knock at the door. "Evelyn." It was Dominic. His voice was warm, filled with a kindness that Patrick had never possessed. Dominic didn't want her money. He had his own. He didn't want her power. He respected it. He just wanted her. "Coming," she called out. Evelyn looked at the pen. She realized she didn't need the reminder anymore. She wasn't that woman in the beige cardigan. She never would be again. She walked to the open window and held the pen over the railing. Below, the deep waters of Lake Como lapped against the stone walls. She let go. The pen tumbled through the air, end over end, a small black speck against the golden sunset. It hit the water with a tiny, insignificant splash and disappeared into the depths. Evelyn smiled. She turned her back on the window, smoothed her dress, and walked out the door to start the rest of her life. The room was silent, but this time it was the silence of peace. And so the ink finally dried on a story that began with a betrayal and ended with an empire. Patrick Ashford and Victoria Vanderbilt learned a lesson that cost them everything. Never mistake silence for weakness. While they were loud in their arrogance, Evelyn was quiet in her power. She proved that you don't need to scream to be heard. Sometimes the loudest sound in the world is the scratch of a pen on paper. Patrick spent the rest of his days looking at a photograph of what could have been, while Evelyn walked into a future where she was finally truly seen. It serves as a brutal reminder to us all. Be careful who you step on while climbing the ladder, because you never know who owns the building. If you enjoyed this story of ultimate revenge and justice, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. What would you have done if you were in Evelyn's shoes? Would you have forgiven Patrick, or did he get exactly what he deserved? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you haven't already, subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss a story. We have plenty more tales of hidden fortunes and shocking twists coming your way. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.